The purpose of this tutorial is to teach some basic concepts about Maya. I will be creating a building using primitive shapes. I'm not going to be doing some more advanced kind of modeling and extrusions and other things like that because I want to start very basically. One of the imposing things about Maya is that there are about 1 billion things that you can do at any given moment. I mean, look at all these buttons that are just here on this first screen. And I think the best way to deal with that is just to take a couple at a time and get comfortable with them and then work your way up to more complex things. So I'm going to start by creating a fairly simple building just using some shapes and hopefully teach some concepts there. Now I have my Maya screen open, I have my ground plane. This doesn't really exist. When I render you will not see this, but it's nice to have as kind of a baseline. And I am going to talk about how we move around in our screen. So I can zoom in and out by rolling the mouse wheel. I can hold down Alt and press the middle mouse wheel button to do this two-dimensional kind of pan. And if I hold down Alt and press the left mouse button, I will tumble or rotate around my screen. And so those are your 3 basic movement types in Maya, and you can do a lot of things with those. Now I'm going to start up at the top. I should be in the modeling tab here. Depending on which one of these you select, you get different menu options and things like that. Right now I just want to be in modeling. And under this poly modeling tab, you will see your primitive shapes. These are your basic building blocks of 3D graphics. So I have spheres, cubes, cylinders. I'm going to start by clicking on a cylinder, and when I do, it appears on my screen. Now I can manipulate this cylinder using 3 different tools. I have the Move tool, which is here, and the quick key for that shortcut key is W. Rotate is E, and Scale is R. And so those 3 letters are picked because they're right next to each other on the keyboard. When I select them, a gizmo appears, this multicolored thing here, and I press W, so now I can move it. Now I can pick this up in the middle and move it. One of the difficult things with 3D is it's difficult when I grab it like this. Am I moving it backwards? Am I moving it along the Z-axis? Am I moving it up? It's not always clear in 3D, and so the best thing to do is to always just, or not always, but most of the time, is to click right onto the axis arrow. If I click onto this y-axis arrow, it can only move around the along the y-axis. We call that translation. It's translating on the y-axis. That's just a 3D term. Moves, easier to say. This is movement on the z-axis, and this is movement on the x-axis. And as long as I'm clicked on those arrows, I can safely assume that I'm only moving on that axis. If I press E, I have my rotation tools. Same thing, I can click in the middle and rotate it along all axes at the same time. Very difficult to use. Press Ctrl Z to go back. I can also rotate specifically along a single axis. You'll also notice on the left side of your screen you'll either have the attribute editor or the channel box. You can press Ctrl A to switch between those. This one is called the channel box. It's the one with all the numbers. And every change that you're making is actually a change that's happening here. If I want to be more specific in my rotations, I can type in a number here instead. If I want to rotate on the x-axis 45 degrees, if I come here and type in 45, I'll get an exact 45 degrees. And so if you need to be more precise than this moving, the channel box is where you do that. The last kind of movement that I can do, or manipulation on this, is called scale. And scale is R, and it's right here. Scale, I can choose this yellow cube in the middle, and that will scale everything proportionally. If I drag to the right, it's bigger. If I drag to the left, it's smaller. If I grab along one of the axes, I can scale it in that specific direction. What I'm going to start with here is I'm going to make a thin, big cylinder. This is going to be the steps to the building that I will be making. And what I'm going to do here is in the channel box, because this is a brand new primitive that I haven't done a lot to yet, I still have access to the inputs. And so you'll see inputs here, and this is the name it was given by default because it was the first polygon cylinder that was created in this project. And when I click on that, I get some additional options. And one of those is subdivisions axis. That is how many times the polygons are subdivided around to create a round surface, because polygons are flat. To create a round surface, we just have to use a lot of them. If I turn this number down to, say, 3, suddenly I only have 3 subdivisions and I have a triangle. If I do 6, and I have a 6-sided, I'm going to choose 8 to create the steps of my building. And maybe I'll scale it a little smaller. Now, the inputs isn't always available. Sometimes when I change an object, or in this case, I'm going to duplicate it, and that causes those inputs to go away. I can't change the inputs of a duplicated part. And the way I create a duplicate is by pressing Control D. Now, Control D makes a duplicate in the exact same location. It's almost like you didn't do anything, but if I pull this up now with the Move tool, you'll see that there is a exact copy in there. And I'm going to move that exact copy up, scale it down slightly, and put it there, maybe scale a little bigger. Now, hopefully this will work. After I've duplicated and moved something, I can repeat that by pressing Shift D. And so in this case, Shift D, look at the fact that I made a duplicate, I lifted it up, I made it smaller with a scale, and it repeats all of those things. But it's easy to accidentally click somewhere else and make that not work. So Shift D doesn't always work, but I should be able to keep hitting Shift D and making more and more of these. If not, I can always just Control D and scale them. So that's going to be the base of my building. Now, the next step is, let's make a column. I'll use another cylinder. You'll notice that your cylinders always default out to the middle, and so you may have to move them around. If you, an easier way to select things sometimes is under Windows. If you come here to the outliner, the outliner is a list of every object you make. Now, sometimes it's good to actually rename these, because P-cylinder 3, P-cylinder 4 may not be the most useful, but if I click on each of these, I can have them selected by going to the outliner. And if I have something selected and I press F, it will zoom in on that specific thing as well. So that's another way that you can navigate. I'm going to make the cylinder. I'll use scale, which is R, to lift it up. And I'll probably have to make it a little thinner and lift it up. That's probably too tall. I can always change it later. And I want to show you next some other manipulations that you can make. So with this cylinder, the cylinder is made up of polygons, and polygons are made up of faces, which is the gray part currently. They're made up of edges, and they're made up of vertices, or a vertex, a point at the end of each of these. And if I hold down my right mouse, I might right mouse click and hold down on it, up here at the top there is a wheel that allows me to select those specific components of it. Now, object mode is the default. That's the one where if I select this, I click on it and it's green and I'm selecting everything. But I can come here and I can select face. And now I can choose individual faces. And I can move, scale, and rotate individual faces. Now, in this case, if I move this face, it's going to look really weird. I don't necessarily want to do that here. If I right-click again, I can choose edge, and I can choose edges. If I double-click, it will choose a loop, which means any edges that are connected, it will choose them in addition to that. I can also right-click and choose vertex, which allows me to choose individual points. What I'm going to do is make the top of my cylinder a little thinner than the bottom. And I could do this a bunch of different ways. I could choose this face. If I hold down Shift, I can choose multiple faces. So Shift allows you to add a previous selection. That's a lot of clicking because there's quite a few faces up here, probably 20. I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to choose Vertex and just draw a box, a selection box, around all of the vertices, or verts, at the top of this cylinder. And you'll see that they've been selected because they're yellow. The unselected ones down here at the bottom are pink. And verts always happen at the end of edges. Now, if I come here to scale, if I press R and I scale this now, it's going to pull those verts closer together, which will create this kind of look. And now I have a cylinder that's a little more detailed. Now, if I want to do even more with it, I could always come into the inputs, increase maybe how many subdivisions there are. Whoops, probably should have done that before I started manipulating it. Sometimes Because what Maya really does is it always starts with the basic cylinder and then applies any change you've made to it by going through the channel box every time. Sometimes that can cause some issues. If it's not doing what you think it should, sometimes you can fix that by coming here to modify and freezing the transformations. That resets it to say this is now the default shape. You'll notice that all of my numbers are now back to 0. Now if I type in 30, let's see what happens. Nope, still does. So I'm kind of out of luck with that. But I could even do individual changes now. Like for example, I could come here to edge, and maybe I could choose every other edge. I'm holding down Shift to select multiple edges. Because I have an even number, that should work out great. And now I'm going to try and scale those in a little bit. And that should give me just a slight I don't know if that's even going to be visible. It's kind of goofed up at the top there, but that's okay. So I'm going to move this in now. Let's make a base for this first. So I'm going to make another cylinder. We'll do a pretty simple base here. Press Control D to make a duplicate, make a smaller one, and then hopefully again I can press Shift D again and it will create that other one. Now I can kind of see some of that stuff on the inside. I'm not sure if that thing I did with the edges was worth doing because it might have caused more problems than not, but that's okay. Let's do a torus. Torus is like a donut. Not like a donut, it is a donut. I'm going to put that on the top. I could do a more complex top to my cylinder, but I don't want to, and I don't know how. So those two things combined will lead me to not do that. Now, once I've made the cylinder, I want to duplicate this. I can create groups of objects by selecting all of them, and I just did a selection box around all of them and pressing Control G. Now when I Control G it, you'll see items grouped successfully, but now it doesn't always put this gizmo, this is your center point, in the right spot for a group. So that's way over there. I'd rather it be in the center. I can come up to Modify and say Center Pivot, and that will put it back in the center. And now when I move this or scale it, it should scale and move very nicely for me. So I'm going to go ahead and set this. I might not have given myself tremendous amount of room here, so I'll scale it down a little bit more, put that there, and maybe scale it up a bit too. If I click off of this group and I click back on it, only the thing I currently clicked on is selected. I have to press up on my arrow keys to get back to the group, and there's a hierarchy there. This single object is its own thing, but when I press up it goes up to the group. If I have a group in a group, I'd have to keep pressing up, but if I press up I should get back to that group, and now I can duplicate this. Now I'm going to try something here. I could just Control D to duplicate the group. Move this to the other spot. Hit Shift D. Yeah, so to be able to rotate this around the center point, I can change where that pivot is, and that pivot, that center pivot here, is where it's going to rotate around. I can hold down D and actually just adjust that. As long as I'm holding down D, I can set where this is. And I could try to put that in the center and then Control D and rotate the next one, but I think that's going to be kind of hard to line up exactly, so I'll probably just do it by hand. So I'm just going to make some duplicates, put them in the corners. Go back to center pivot. I'm not super concerned about it not being exactly the right angle. I don't think it'll be noticeable. So I'll go ahead and pause this and keep working on it. Alright, I duplicated the columns all the way around. Now I need a top to this. I want to make a dome. Before I do that, I am going to make another cylinder and have that be, I'll expand it out and scale it down. Now, lining up things can be difficult in this perspective view, which is my three-dimensional view. If I ever want to try a different view in order to line things up better, if I press spacebar, it'll take me to my 4 view, which gives me a top, front, and side that are perfectly two-dimensional. In fact, if I hit spacebar again when my mouse is over one of them, it will expand that view specifically. And in the top view, for example, if I try to hold Alt and tumble with my left mouse, I can't, because orthographic views are forced to be two-dimensional. And that just gives me more control over how I'm sizing something, because sometimes that's really difficult to do from 3D, and vice versa. Sometimes 3D things it's much easier in perspective view than it is in not perspective view. So I have this now. Now I want to put a dome on the top. I'm going to choose the sphere, move it out here and scale it a little bit bigger. Now to make a dome, I am going to take a sphere and cut it in half. And I'm going to cut it in half by choosing faces, right-clicking, and choose face. And now I can choose faces. And if I draw a big box around it, it will select a bunch of faces. But I don't really want to do this in 3D mode, because you'll notice right here, for example, I didn't have it perfectly lined up, and so I didn't get exactly halfway. This is better to do if I hit spacebar to go into one of my two-dimensional modes, like this front view. And now when I draw a box like this, I know I have only the bottom half of this selected. And when I have faces or edges or verts selected, I can delete them just by pressing delete. And that will make it go away. Now, something to know about primitives, they are hollow. All 3D objects are hollow on the inside. You'll notice that it is black instead of gray on the inside because the material that we're seeing, that gray, that's the default, that will change later. These things are one-sided by default. They're not placed on the inside of objects because you're not really supposed to see the inside of them. Now this thing's really hollow. I could just place it on that and hide the fact that it's hollow by putting it on there, but I'm going to do this a little differently. Now I'm probably still in face mode from before, so I need to right-click again and go to object mode. I need to be in the mode where I'm selecting the entire sphere, and I need to be able to have it all selected. It'll all be green like this, and I'm going to choose extrude, which is, I think, by far the most useful tool. We'll talk about extrude a lot. Extrude is kind of hard to explain what it looks like. It's like a green or an orange rectangle cube sort of thing with a white plane on it. When I click on that, I get a bunch of options, and one of those at the top here is thickness. Now I can just type in a number, but it's easier, I think. I can click with just my mouse on the word thickness, and I'm going to drag to the right. I don't want to drag to the left. Notice how it turned black when I drag to the left. That means I'm actually seeing the inside, the back of the polygons. I don't want that. I want to drag to the right, and that's going to increase the thickness of that surface, which gives me a more tactile dome here. Once I've done that, I can right-click again and go back to object mode, and now I have a dome that I can resize. I can make it fit. I'll go back to my 2D up here to match it up a little more. Maybe scale it a little bigger. And I can work in this mode too with all 4 views. Your 4 view is here on the left side. You have your perspective view. If you ever just want to get back to perspective, this button here will do that as well. Now I have this building. And I could add some more things. I could put another sphere on the top of it. I'm not even going to dome it because I'm just going to hide it inside of the existing one. So if I set translate X to 0 and Z to 0, would that be right in the middle? Not quite. That looks about right. And every new thing that I add, especially when working like this, it really just comes down to the amount of time you put into it. Every new element that I add, every extra bit of complexity, even using these very basic shapes, if I come in and I just start making steps like in between, it's just a time effort. That's really what you're going to see as the big difference that separates and something that's fun and interesting to look at versus something that's not is how much time you're willing to put into adding those little important details. And so you'll want to spend some time, just think about how you can do things. Looking up reference materials is great, like find some pictures of something online and use those to help you get ideas. And you might want to like create, I mean, you could do a science fiction thing, like it doesn't have to be like, yeah, well, I'm saying it like mine's super realistic. It doesn't have to be kind of based on reality. You can create anything using this thing. And I'm going to just add some extra steps here, and I'll probably do some more details. And then next, I want to talk about how how we can change the colors from this default really dull drab gray. This is called a Lambert. It's a non-shiny finish. How we can change that to something that is shiny or reflective. There's a lot of different materials. Some of them are presets, and so they're really fun to use because they're really easy to use. And for the next video, we'll talk about how those work. So I'm just going to keep adding some more details to this. And oh, you know what? I'm going to show one more thing here while I still can. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to create a cylinder. I'm going to, whoops, I pressed the wrong button. I pressed 4 on my keyboard, which switched you to wireframe. 5 is the default, so if you press 4 and you're like, oh no, I ruined everything, just press 5 and it should be fine. I'm going to make a very tall, thin cylinder, and I'm going to bend this. It's going to be like a wire, so I'm going to make it really thin and really tall. And I'm going to use a feature. Usually I don't show this yet, but it'll be fun if I can do it. I'm going to bend this. Now right now, this cylinder can't be bent because things can only bend where there's an edge. And right now there's only 2 horizontal edges on this cylinder, one at the very bottom and one at the top. And so there's not really a lot I can do other than I could take, like, I can bend it like this, but I want to do like a round bend. So I need to create more edges that it can be bent along. And the way that I do that, the easiest way is to subdivide it. So I'm going to come here to cylinders, and you'll see that in your inputs for that cylinder, you have subdivision height. And let's do, like, we need a lot, so I'm going to do 60. And when I type in 60, you will see that it subdivided those polygons, or it cut them into more polygons, which adds more complexity but gives us more control. I might even do more than that. Let's do 80. Let's see what happens here. And I am going to choose, I'm going to make the caps 0 too. Let's see if that helps in a little bit. Now, this is purely optional, just for fun. I'm going to go to, instead of modeling, I'm going to choose animation because there are some deform options in here. And under deform, I'm going to go to nonlinear and choose bend. Now bend is one of the options in my channel box right here. And if I take this, I can now change the number of this curvature on this bend input, and I can either type in a number, or what's even easier, I think, because it's more visual and a preview in real time, if I click on the word curvature and I come back out to my perspective window and hold down the left mouse, or the middle mouse, if I hold down the middle mouse, if I slide to the left, it'll make it a negative number. If I slide to the right, it'll make it a positive number. And so if I drag this to, let's make it exactly 90, I'm going to create a rounded surface. And now if I want to make it even longer, I mean, I could do all sorts of things with this. I could go here and I could change the curvature to 360 and or 180, sorry, I know math, 180 and have a perfect circle. Or if I go back to 90, I can then choose these front faces of this. Oops, and I didn't hold down shift. I have to hold down shift so that both of them are selected. And I could just move those. Is it going to not let me do this? Let's try doing one at a time. Ooh, it's kind of crazy. Maybe an extrude. If if I click on both of them and choose extrude instead, let's see, there we go. And I could create all sorts of fun kind of wiry lattice work. So if I get another cylinder, oh, by the way, what you want to do when you use these kinds of deforms and stuff, notice that when I try to rotate it, it gets all crazy and weird. That's because it's still like doing this, it's still creating the polygon, it's still bending it, and anytime I change it, it kind of updates those numbers. So I don't want it to do it anymore. I want to treat this like a finished thing. And the way that I can do that is by making it forget how it was made. So with this selected, I am now going to go to Edit, Delete by Type, History, and now it should forget how it was originally made, and I should be able to rotate it and scale it and do anything else that I wanted to do with it to make it that way. And so I can do some pretty fun things just with that cylinder tool and the bend. It's just for fun, it's purely optional, but if you want to mess around with that, once again, it's kind of just the amount of effort that you're willing to put into it is going to make it look better or worse. So I'm going to keep working on this, and then the next video will be about how to add materials to this so that it looks more like an actual real-world thing instead of this gray blob. And then lastly, we'll talk about how to add our environmental stuff so that it exists within a terrain.